where do you go from here? Because right now the Penguins are playing awful. They look like one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League. The vibe around the team looks like it is absolutely horrendous. You're 15th out of 16 teams in the East. You're dead last in the Metro, and you've played more games than everybody in the Eastern Conference except for the New Jersey Devils, and that one game in hand is not going to do you much good in the standings. So where do you go from here?
Genuinely, you need to just call it a year.
You're waving the white flag?
Yeah, I know it's at this point as we record this, not technically Thanksgiving yet, but I mean, at the quarter point of the season is where a lot of teams kind of draw their line in the sand and say, this is the kind of team we're going to be this year. This is the direction we're going in. The Penguins have not outwardly said what direction they are going in this year. I think a lot of us can say the writing is on the wall, but at the same time, it's a little tough to say that whenever A, they haven't outwardly said it, and B, when you look at the lineup, I mean, there's the star players are still here. There still seems to be some veteran talent in the lineup that on paper should do something. I think we all came into this season thinking this lineup is better. They've all performed worse. It's an extremely tough watch these days too. So the direction you go in, where this team goes from here, is essentially wave the white flag on this year. I think we had this discussion with Hunter last week. You might be able to salvage something next year. If you can it this year, you have a ton of cap space opening up, and you just try and sway a star or two to come, and maybe you make certain trades, maybe you elevate certain areas of the lineup, and then you go for it next year as the true final last dance. Mm-hmm. But this year, it just doesn't seem like there's they have, like I said, they're not they might not say a direction that they're going in, but probably won't. But it certainly, from at least my perspective and your perspective, doesn't look like it's going anywhere this year at all.
Yeah. The way that they've performed through 23 games, it's hard to imagine that they are going to reverse course so drastically and become a team that can fight into a playoff spot. And I understand, points-wise, they're not far off of a playoff spot. Performance-wise, they are extremely far off of a playoff spot. But I do want to push back on one thing you said there. You said, yeah, I mean, maybe, you wave the white flag on this season. Next year, you have the cap space. Maybe you sway a star. What star wants to come to this sinking ship right now? Like, I understand. To some extent, Sidney Crosby is a draw. But any star in their right mind is not going to say, hey, I'm going to come for that last dance, that one season, and then be done. Because most of these guys don't want one-year contracts. And the Penguins aren't going to give out an 8-year contract to a 28 or 27-year-old, especially because I don't think they have the power and this position to where star players are going to want to come to Pittsburgh anymore. I think they're going to see the writing on the wall, just as you do, just as I do, and say, this is not a contending team anymore. If I want to contend, Pittsburgh is not it. If I want a long contract, Pittsburgh is likely not it. I think there's only going to be 2 or 3 players that fit the mold that Pittsburgh would want to give that long contract to. And I don't think those players want to come to Pittsburgh anymore. So as nice as it would be to say, hey, everybody's going to want to come for the last dance of Malkin and Crosby together, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it.
Yeah, and I don't fully believe it either. Maybe instead of a signing, it's a trade of sort. Maybe you have
It would have to be.
It would have to be a trade. And not only that, it isn't impossible to convince it, like I said, maybe a star to convince them, hey, you're coming in for the last dance of Crosby and Malkin. You'll play with Crosby for a couple seasons. Maybe he'll sign another new deal. You never know what Crosby's future will hold. He's at least so far still proving he can still cut it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the right sort of player that you can convince and say, this will be your team, or you'll be part of a big push, because part of Kyle Dubas' plan is to build for the future, is to have a winning team after this era. Tell them, hey, you can be a part of the winning team that we're building here. Here are the young prospects. Yeah. Here are some of the expectations. Here are our high draft picks this year, possibly top 5. And then you have a future to be with. So maybe you can sway someone. Again, it's a tough sell.
Yeah.
It isn't easy. You do have to think of who Kyle Dubas has worked with before. Perhaps Mitch Marner doesn't sign an extension this season, and now I'm getting into fantasy land. But,
yeah. Well, we
No.
started from a place of fantasy land thinking a star is going to want to sign in Pittsburgh, but I get what you're saying. There is a non-zero chance that they can sway somebody worth their weight in salary cap space to come to Pittsburgh and help turn this team around. They did it with Erik Karlsson, but that's the other part of it. It has to work out.
Yeah.
You cannot miss, because when you do, we're a year and a quarter into what it happens when you swing and miss. When you swing for the fences, you connect, and you end up on the warning track, and it gets caught by a left fielder. That's where you're at right now. You got nothing, even though you had a mighty swing. You made great connection, and it just didn't work out for anything. So that's a difficult position for the Penguins because, as you mentioned, they have not committed to a direction. We've, in this segment, kind of committed to a direction for them, but that doesn't mean that that's what they're going to do. But would you, if you were Dubas, or at what point, because you said that you would try to go for it next year, at what point do you cut cord and jump fully into a rebuild?
That's it. That's so tough because it's always the fact that the stars are still here. I mean, Crosby's not going anywhere. Malkin, you don't need to send anywhere. He's got a year left after this one.
Malkin's not going anywhere.
So he doesn't have to go anywhere. He's not going anywhere. Letang's the interesting one. He always has seemed like the most likely to be moved if it came to that situation. Maybe you see if he wants to go to Montreal and call it up there. It's if you're due. I mean, we've seen rebuilds go pretty quickly before. I mean, New York announced their rebuild, and then 2 weeks later, we're a Stanley Cup contender. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying the Penguins are going to be that quick, but you never know. Anything is possible if you're committing to it and outwardly committing to it and saying to the people you're committing to it. Then maybe at least there would be a sense of ease in the fan base, like a sense of, okay, thank you for letting us know what's going on publicly. I think me and you can, kind of say ourselves what we think is going on. But a lot of the people, I mean, the Penguins have a smart fan base. A lot of them are kind of dense as well. So they need to be told that that's the direction they're going in. And whenever I say a lot of the fan base, I'm talking about a specific crowd, and I think we all know that crowd. Yeah,
and even that part, I don't know. Like, I feel like that part is they're just super hopeful because they can't believe that this is what they're seeing, which is fair. Because I don't think I ever expected the Penguins to be this bad with Sidney Crosby.
Exactly. And
still performing at that level, not just Sidney Crosby and Jeff. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I get it. And then when it comes to, like, everyone's going to be wondering what's going on with this team. When you're sitting around your Thanksgiving table this week and your family is asking you, so what's going on with the Penguins? What is going on with your team? You can just try and tell them, hey, like, they're just not officially saying what's going on, which is they're cutting it to the, not cutting it to the bolts, but certainly not going for it this year, it seems. Maybe they try and revamp for next year. But at this moment, they're not going to publicly say it until they do. Until they do. They're not going to publicly say it, but this is it. This is the time of tear down, time of rebuild, time of reset even. And it's not going to be pretty. But I think at this point, if anyone has watched enough games in November, we should all be used to this now.
They're at an inflection point right now in the organization because the team as it stands right now is not good enough to do anything. Yep. So you can either commit to the rebuild and go in that direction, or you can put your foot in the ground and say, this team needs a lot of help. I'm going to give them a lot of help because I believe that they deserve one more run. That's going to cost, because all the moves that you could have made that were a little bit cheaper, that could have been kind of decisive moves that you don't have to pay too much, but it helps the team now. Those moves haven't worked out. They haven't. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cody Glass has been fine, but he's also been injured. And even when he's been fine, he hasn't scored a goal. And as much as I like what I've seen from Cody Glass, he hasn't scored a goal at all. That's a problem. So you're at an inflection point. And if you choose to stay here, and if you choose to hold down Pat, like Kyle Dubas did last year, which I don't think he will do. Last year, he was very, very patient with this team, but they were also playing better at points than they are now. But if you hold Pat, you're putting your team in purgatory.